Viewers, welcome to TV Metro Mail. You are watching Chit Chat and I am Imamul Haq. I'm privileged to have my today's guest. My today's guest is Kevin Lawrence. Kevin Lawrence is a former RCMP officer, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He served RCMP over 28 years. He co-authored a book with Miles O titled Black Cop. I'm privileged. I'm very delighted to have him here today with me. Let me introduce my today's guest. Hi, Calvin. Thank you very
Hello.
much for joining us.
You're welcome, sir.
So, how are you doing today?
Very good. Everybody's under house arrest, as they say, because of the COVID. But what are you going to do? You have to just go with the flow, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's start with because when we talk about inclusion, we often talk about diversity as well, and we say that diversity is our strength. So when the word comes to your mind, the inclusion, what comes to your mind when you hear the word? What comes to your mind?
Well, let me first start off with that I had 8.5 years with Halifax City Police prior to RCMP. So from 1969 to 1978, I was with Halifax City Police. I then left there and I went to the RCMP, and I had 28 years with the RCMP. So I had a total of 36 years in policing, rural, city, and federal policing. Having said that, when I worked in the area of diversity management in the RCMP, and diversity management basically means managing differences. And we are in a position now where we have a number of different cultures. And we can talk about race and we can talk about culture. Now, if we talk about culture, race becomes an indicator of a different culture. So when, for example, I don't know what your culture is. If you wouldn't mind telling me what your roots are, like your
We are basically, I am from Bangladesh, so we
okay.
speak Bengali. So we are, yeah.
So that's so we immediately look at different cultures, and some people are have problems with different cultures, as you know. So inclusion becomes a very, and diversity becomes a very long topic and subject based on your personal belief systems. And we have personal belief systems and we have general belief systems. Our personal belief systems are things like race, same-sex relationships, religion is a big one, whereas general is hockey or the weather. So, of course, when we challenge our personal belief systems, it has to be done at the right time, right place, in the right way, or else the sparks fly. So that's kind of how I look at diversity. Everybody, and especially in policing, because it is only in North America that the police are looked on with the clergy or with the doctors. In some countries, the police are looked down upon in some cultures. When you talk about diversity, that's probably an hour's presentation, but that's kind of where I think from a policing perspective and from a general perspective in some ways, people sometimes hate other people's cultures and therefore they hate their diversity.
Thank you, Calvin. And you said that we have some personal, with diversity there is a link with our personal belief and our social belief, something. But how to accept the culture of the others, because culture is related to their belief as well. It seems that though you have a strong belief, but you have to accept others' belief as well. So how do you see that?
Well, first of all, culture is nothing more than what we do every day. If our culture is to stand up, we stand up. If our culture is to sit down, we sit down. Culture is nothing more than what we do every day as a group. Now, the problem arises when cultures do not mesh. In other words, you may have a culture that does not mesh with so-called Canadian culture, so-called American culture. So then it becomes a situation where people demand that they subscribe to the culture. You've heard people say, well, if you come to Canada, you have to do what Canadians do. Now, of course, you could make that retroactive to First Nations people and tell it to the Europeans. You see, so I mean, you know, or you bring your wars and your conflicts to our country. Well, the French and English Europeans brought their wars to the First Nations culture and country. So anybody can make a statement, but when we sit down and discuss that statement and pick it apart, then it becomes evident that we all are looking for dominance and control in some area. Now, we live in a world where Europeans dominate the world wherever they are, and that is because of military might and economic might. So when we look at culture, we say, well, who subscribes to whose culture, and who can change and who cannot change so that we get along. Multiculturalism is some pie in the sky. Multiculturalism, because nobody is going to adapt to one culture. So therefore you need diversity management. And this is there are 9 areas of people activity that we work through on a daily basis: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And every one has a conflict in racial issues and cultural issues.
So thank you, Calvin. Do you think that compared to our, neighboring countries or, many other countries, we are managing quite well with regard to diversity management?
Well, I think we're doing well, but usually trends go from one country to another, and I think that we have some time right now in Canada to work through this without violence, as you're seeing in the U.S. But that is coming because you're seeing issues now where there's violence between the police and the Black community and the First Nations community on the news. You're seeing a lot of conflict. You're seeing physical conflict, but these are just the sparks. And if we don't want it to burst into a full-blown fire like it's almost doing in the U.S., then we have to talk about it now, and we have to be realistic about it, and we have to talk without a fear of insulting each other.
Thank you. Since we believe in Canada, we believe in diversity. I think the mutual respect is more important, as you said, with regard to the diversity management, right?
The respect, you'd have to define respect. I would say that Canada, and we have to be brutal about this, is that has always practiced white supremacist behavior, which is not to be confused with white behavior. So there's always been a component of white supremacist behavior. I have the documentation. I can read it. I can show it to you. That there has been what so-called systemic discrimination throughout Canada, throughout its existence, and still exists. So it's in that backdrop that we have to talk about diversity.
Okay. Thank you very much. So let us talk a little bit about racial profiling, because the racial profiling comes from the racial background. So what is we often see that this occurs even in Canada. So how does racial profiling carry out by a person who is in position or in authority?
Well, okay, we talk about racial profiling. And we talk about it. Myself growing up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, I'm a 7th generation Black Canadian from Nova Scotia. So there's a lot of conflict in Nova Scotia about racial profiling. My growing up in my teenage years, I had a motorcycle, a little Honda, and I was being stopped all the time by the police. And it was racial profiling, but nobody ever called it racial profiling. That's just a title that somebody came up with over the years. They weren't calling it racial profiling in 1967, 68. So, okay, now we have to take words and phrases, and you can take Black Lives Matter, you can take idle no more. You can take all of these phrases, and it may not mean the same to you as it means to me. And we're using the same word or phrases. So racial profiling, first of all, is it a title or is it an action? Just think about that for a second. Ask again, is it a title or is it an action? All right, so we'll say, oh, yes, of course it's a title. Now, if it's an action, then, and it's based on your race, racial profiling, then obviously it is wrong. How it plays itself out is that if I see you, if I talk to you on the phone and you have an accent compared to my accent, then or as I say, I see you. If I take steps to minimize your accomplishments and restrict your opportunities in one or more of the 9 major areas of people activity that I just mentioned, then obviously that is wrong and people have to be held accountable.
Okay, I hear you, Calvin. So that reminds me, your story reminds me one of a story that I heard from one of my friend, my Italian white friend who got married to a black man, and they were blessed with 2 sons.
Yes.
And she was telling me that every time her sons and husband was had to face additional security screening at the airport, you know, because of their color. So that
Yes.
time I didn't realize that, but now I can see that, I can relate that with, this is kind of racial profiling. She was okay
Yes.
every time, but because her husband and their 2 sons color was different, that's why they were always, they had to face a different kind of security screening.
Well, that's. I mean, we're all subjected to that. I mean, I figure I should buy lotto tickets because I was always the random guy checked at the airport. This is a random check. I should buy lotto tickets. I might win something, right? So we all know that it's done, and it's done under a disguise of random checks or whatever. So this is something that that we have, and especially in policing, if you're driving a nice car and you're black, then you're looked on in a more suspicious manner by some individual police officers. So certainly it's wrong, and certainly it should be addressed. And there are ways that you can do that without the traditional ways of courts and filing complaints or whatever. Work inside the law, but outside the box.
Thank you. Definitely, we'll talk about the racial profiling, how it happens or occur in police system. But before going into that, can you just tell us something about that? How racial profiling and criminal profiling two are different, or what is the difference between these two?
Well, if you stole something from a house,
Yeah,
and you were black, and you were wearing a red hat, and you were wearing yellow pants, and I'm driving down the street, and I see somebody in a red hat and yellow pants, certainly I'm going to stop them. That's what I would consider criminal profiling. This you have reasonable probable grounds to believe that this is the person you're looking for. But if you just see a black person and you know that black person, that's all you have, he's not dressed in the pants and the hat, and you stop them, then to me that's racial profiling. But it's done in more subtle ways too. For example, going to the store and you're followed around, or you're accused of which happened to me. You're accused of stealing something based on the color of your skin. So I mean, there is abuse. There is certainly abuse. So criminal profiling to me is having the reasonable grounds to enact your process, no matter what it might be.
So as you are saying that when there is a racial profiling is occurring or happening, basically it comes from the stereotype of assumptions based on somebody's color or ethnic background. So we believe in inclusive society. So how can we get rid of this kind of assumption or stereotype thinking or belief?
Well, I always think that, and I say this in my book, assimilation fantasies leads to the inclusion, the illusion of inclusion.
Yeah.
There's an illusion of inclusion, and what we're talking about, although we don't say it, is that inclusion into which culture. And I would leave that out there for people to think about when we talk about inclusion. We're talking about white culture. Inclusion, the first, the only, the highest. What are you comparing that to? What culture are you comparing that to? Of course, we're comparing it to European culture. So I think that to think that we are going to be 100% included into another culture, I think first of all it's wrong, and secondly, because my culture is gone, we all have different histories. We're the only people that can't write a letter back home. We're the only people that don't have a language and a land base because of our histories as a Black Canadian and slavery and indentured servants. So everybody has a different experience on coming to Canada. So I don't believe that we're ever going to have a utopia where people are going to be included, but I do believe that individuals should be held accountable to stop when they're abusing people because of racial profiling. They should be held accountable. Individuals. There's too much talk about groups, studies, committees, to have it produce and document. And we all know the thicker the document, the more true it must be, right? So, what I'm saying is that they take this thick document and they set it on a shelf somewhere and we start all over again. I think when there's deliberate, intentional, because sometimes accidentally somebody may assume, how many times somebody says, well, you're from India, or you're from here, or you're from there, rather than just ask you where you're from. So I'm assumed, for me, people assume I'm from Jamaica or from the islands or whatever, when I'm a 7th generation Canadian. So what I'm saying is you ask the people, and when people assume through racial profiling, and therefore they're the dominant culture, and they abuse you because of that, they should be held accountable as individuals, not as a group. And this is not what's happening in Canada for anything, including policing.
Thank you, Calvin. During your long, professional career with the policing system, so what was your main observation concerning inclusion and racism?
Well, what I went on, as in my book, Black Cop, when I went on the Halifax City Police, the Black Panther Party had come to Halifax. And as a result of that, the police, who didn't really hire Black people at that time, hired myself and some other people. I was hired in '69. Leighton Johnson was hired in 1967. Between 1967 and 1995, there was only one promotion of a Black person. So what you have, and I've sent this to you about, is racial tailoring. Racial tailoring is minimizing your opportunities and restricting your opportunities and minimizing your accomplishments. That's racial tailoring. And then they have the racial showcasing. Racial showcasing is the first, the highest, the only, and we make a big thing of that in the media. But what they don't say is that if you have one person that's racially showcased, you have 4 or 5 more that are being racially tailored. And so it's managed so that the numbers can be controlled. And this is the way it's run in policing. And when you talk to chiefs or deputy chiefs, these people are politicians. Commissioners, these people are politicians. They do not police. They are politicians. They talk. They meet with police boards. They meet with mayors. So all conflict starts from the street up, not from the top down. And when you get to the top, then it becomes political, and it should not be political. There should be an arm's length situation with chiefs and commissioners, from mayors police boards and whatever.
Okay, thank you. So, do you think that, or if I ask you in a different way, let me put it in a different way, is racial profiling still being carried out by the institutions or by police in Canada?
Oh yes, yes, and that plays out in street checks, which was a big conflict. Street checks. Um, if I look at somebody as a police officer, I may, in my mind, racially profile them. In other words, I look at them and I say, okay, well, I'll give you an example. Here's a good example. There was a lot of robberies in Halifax, a lot of robberies, and I worked the black community, and I saw a group of black youth walking with a white male. All right, so that's racial profiling in my head. Now, what I did is that I followed them, I observed them, and they tried to rob him because I knew that that person was in the black community looking for uh, women or looking for the bootleggers. So you could say, yeah, I racially profiled, but they didn't know I was racially profiling because I didn't do anything until the crime took place. I didn't accost them when they were walking. I didn't say, what are you doing here? So my gut feeling, which police officers have, instinct, to intuition, knowing without knowing why, that's what I did, and that was the right way to do it. So it doesn't matter what I think. This is what people get mixed up. Racial profiling. It doesn't matter what I think. You can have all the views you want. I can take you at 20 years of age and put you in police training, and people say, "Well, we have to see about their beliefs and whatever." It's not about beliefs. It's not about your personal belief system. It's about behavior. And I'm sure as an individual, you have a personal belief system. And we could get into the weeds if we sat down and had a coffee sometime about what you think of Black Canadians, what you think of other groups, what you think. And you can say to me, well, I think this, this, and this, and it could be awful. I mean, it could be terrible, right? But it's not about what you think. You are allowed to think what you want. It is about behavior. And this is what it's not about guilt. It's about behavior. And this is what we're talking about in policing, behavior. Your job is to get voluntary compliance through verbal intervention. And if a police officer does not want that, then what does that police officer want?
Thank you. So we'll talk more about how things are working in the police system. But before going into that, so can I ask you that how things are different than your time, because you joined in the police back in 1969, you said, right?
Yes.
Do you think that our police system or police has incorporated or included or put the system in place which can help them to serve the community, which is quite diverse? Do you think that they are well equipped?
I think that there's a number of things that have gone wrong. One is that if you look at when I taught in Regina, I taught at the Academy in Regina, and we always started off with Sir Robert Peel's Principles of Policing. And if you don't look that up, Google it, Sir Robert Peel's Principles of Policing. And what it says is the police are the community and the community are the police. So what we would do is you would work with the community in relation to law and order. You wouldn't hunt in the community. Now you take Toronto, where you have like 40 or 50 different diverse groups. It is not reasonable to have a police officer know everything about the culture of that group. However, if I was going to work in your community, I would sit down with a person like you and I would ask, what will keep me safe and what will get me hurt and what will insult you from a policing standpoint. In other words, if I'm enforcing the law in your community, I want to know about your culture. I may not want to know about another culture that's halfway across the city because I'm not there. But once I get to your community, I want to know what that would be. And I had no idea sitting here talking to you, but I would sit down with you and people like you and community leaders like you, and I would say, what is going to keep me safe and what is going to get me hurt? And I would think that, like most cultures, there's turmoil within those cultures. And so I'd want to know about that. And so I think that then the other thing, of course, is that I would walk the beat. You don't have police officers walking the beat anymore, going into stores, talking to people. And if the only time you see a police officer is when there's an issue of policing, then it looks as if we're like an occupying army, as opposed to working with the people. So put the cops back on the beat. Hold individuals accountable for their conscious actions, individual police officers for their conscious actions with the information that they have at the time. Remember, a lot of people talk on black violence. They talk on different. I worked in protective policing, and you had the Sikhs and the Indian people at odds with each other. That is a topic, and maybe black on black crime is a topic. But police officers took the oath. Nobody between those groups took an oath. The police officer took the oath, so it's incumbent upon the police officer to resolve the issue.
Okay, so since you have raised the issue with the police, how police system works, so I believe that you were in your career you were engaged in, or you were helping RCMP to develop training course design, right?
Correct.
So I would like to know. I wonder whether what kind of topics they cover during their training, because sometime, and this is one question, that what type of things they are learning during their training courses. And the other thing is, I don't know whether you can focus on that as well. Sometimes the learning is something I know that can enhance my knowledge, but with regard to attitude, so I don't know how we can change the attitude of the police trainees or the police officers, because learning knowledge is one thing and the attitude is another thing.
I
So
agree.
if you'd like to focus on that. Thank you.
Well, when we start off, of course, in Regina, I think the important thing is that the academy is in Regina, Saskatchewan depot. I think the important thing is that there is zero tolerance for harassment and discrimination, which, of course, is not true. There is some tolerance, and I go into it in my book. The other thing is that you have to explain what police officers do, because we don't know what police officers do in the sense of the citizen on the street, because it's not projected anywhere other than on TV, and it's not pushing people around and screaming at people. So I think the biggest missing link is the teaching of ability to effectively communicate, to resolve issues and get voluntary compliance through verbal intervention. And we spend a lot of time with the taser. We spend a lot of time with the gun. We spend a lot of time with self-defense and handcuffing. We spend a lot of time with traffic stops, but we don't spend a lot of time with communication, effective communication. And there are, if you look up verbal judo, which was developed in the 90s, which is a police course, or it could be for anything, how to effectively communicate. And remember, police officers are talking to people who are afraid, so you have to think for them. Police officers are talking to people who are angry, so you have to think for them. And so I think there should be more of an emphasis put on that. Now, having said that, in training, it's a utopia. It's not the real world. What is missing is the fact that they do not realize now that most recruits that you get are not like us, where we talked face to face every day. We went to the stores. We're on the recruits you're getting today have been on their iPhones, their laptops, they're texting, and 60% of communication, approximately 60%, is body language. followed up by your tone, and your tone denotes attitude. And then the least is what you say. You heard people say, well, didn't you hear what I said? Don't you understand me? We even do that at home sometimes. And then the tone, your tone at home, if you talk to your spouse the wrong way and say the same thing, you want to go see that show again? You want to go see that show again? It could be, could be problematic. So what I'm trying to say is that it's only limited by our imaginations. Now, of how we get voluntary compliance. Now, what is missing? Yes, I can teach you that at Depot. I can teach you that anytime. But unless it's enforced, unless that person is challenged to say, well, did you try to de-escalate this situation, or did you try to escalate it? Did you try to be macho? Because now the way police officers are dressed, they have to know how to communicate even better with the beards and tattoos and all the equipment. Some is needed, some is not needed. They're dressed more like soldiers, and they act more like soldiers. But when I became a police officer, it was called a police force, and now it's called a police service. They don't look like a service; they look like a force. So you have to kind of look at it and say, well, are we getting the right message here? And I think that is the supervision, the holding of accountable of individuals who want to go out there and be macho. Back in the day, in my day, we had the crusty sergeants that would come around and they'd nip that in the bud in 2 seconds. And I think that's what's missing.
Thank you, Calvin. You have brought two interesting and important issues. One is that we have changed the name of our police from police force to police service, but there are more things need to be really done to provide the effective service. That's what you mean, I believe, right?
We look and act like a force now.
That's right.
Whereas we looked and act like a service back in the day on the beat, having cops on the beat, talking to people every day. Other than policing issues, so we were called a force.
Okay, so the police, those who are working in the police system, so they should understand that they should not be portray themselves that they are police force. Rather, they should behave like that they are police service.
Yes,
they are there to serve. So this is important. Yeah. And the other thing you said, that the communication is very important. Communication between the police force or police service and the community, which is very diverse. And at the same time, the communication is very important between these diverse community as well. Sometimes we don't understand other community. So we should be very polite, or we should be very strategic in using language, right? Because different the culture, different ethnic, they have different meaning or connotation of different type of language.
That's correct. And if I were to sit with you again, I'd say, well, now what would insult you if I'm trying to talk to you and get you to do something, or just having a conversation? Because I have no idea. But if I worked in your community, I would certainly know. And then I would try and use that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Calvin. Before we wrap up our this show, I have two questions to ask you. Basically, one is, if you are given an opportunity again to serve the RCMP or the police, what are the things that you would like to do differently?
Well, I think that probably save my money. That might help. Save my money. But I don't think I would do things very differently. I mean, my book describes how I've been treated. I stuck to my guns. I have my principles, which were instilled in me by my parents, and being challenged by my own community. And that's a good point too, is that if you're hiring people from your own community and they're being hired, what you have to watch out for is the fact that maybe they don't want to go work in their own community, because they're going to catch hell from both sides. So maybe they don't want to do that. So you have to be very careful. While we're going to recruit more what they call visible minorities. I don't like the term, because I consider myself a majority, right? On the planet. I live on the planet. So we're majority, we're not majority. So I think that has to be discussed too. That's another whole topic of policing your own community and your own culture. And I think that has to be a little, you have to look, if there's an incident and something happens, that they don't run out and grab the same culture or color of the victim to recruit. So yeah, that's basically I'm willing to argue with anyone of my style of policing. I will debate anyone with my style of policing. And people say, well, that was in your day. Well, when does it become obsolete to learn how to talk to people to avoid conflict? It never does become obsolete, because that's what we do. 96 to 97% is what we do, is talk to people every day. So that's the only thing I would basically change, is probably save my money.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So, being a former police officer or RCMP officer, do you have any specific message to this community?
I would say, because we are all victims of and participants in the global system of white supremacist behavior that should not be confused with white behavior. The difference being deception. Remove deception and you removed racism, white supremacist behavior. Know the game going in. Don't get played. Recruits don't get played. The community don't get played. If they're not holding individuals accountable and they're going in every other direction but that, then I think that everybody should just say stop, and we want to hold this individual police officer accountable for that person's behavior with the information that they had at the time. I think we're very tolerant as communities of people making mistakes, but we're not tolerant of deception and abuse being allowed to take place.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Calvin. Thank you very much for giving us time, and we really appreciate your, sharing your thoughts and your insight and your experience, interesting experience with regard to inclusion and social racial profiling. Thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
joining us. Viewers, thank you very much for being with us. We were hearing from Calvin Lawrence, a former RCMP officer. He shared his experience, his insight from his professional career. So we have to understand that we live in a diverse community. We have to be very tolerant. We have to we have to show mutual respect to each other. And communication is very important, as he said, that, because our different culture has different connotation of different, language, words, and things. So hope this show has given you some kind of insight about inclusion and the racial profiling. So thank you very much for watching our program. Please take care and stay well. Thank you. Bye bye.